You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome to TFM's Books and Comic Show for Star Trek. I'm just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, I'm so glad to have him. Looking a little camouflaged today, and slightly rebellious, Casey Pettitt.
I'm very rebellious. It is me. Good eye.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you were just blending into the background there.
Yes, I do that.
Well, this is great. We're starting a new series. We did Voyager last time. We started that new series, and now we're going to be kicking off a Deep Space Nine series called Rebels, and very excited to be doing that and alternating between that. And of course, in between all of that, we're going to have a brand new book that's just been released by John Jackson Miller. Before we get into everything, just saying thank you. We love that you're listening. We really appreciate it. It does mean a lot to Casey and I that you tuned in to Literary Treks. And make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to your podcasts, and that way you'll get our show as soon as it drops. You can also help us out by giving us a star rating review over on, say, Apple Podcast or Spotify. Those type of places, it really does make a difference. And in fact, if you're listening to the show and you haven't done that, please do that. And we'd really appreciate it. And those who give us written reviews on Apple Podcasts, we actually just read those out in the show, too, just to say thank you. You can also find us on social media. We're on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We're on Instagram at TrekFM. You can find our listeners-only discussion group, and that allows you to talk to listeners from all over the world there. It's called the Babel Conference. Just type that in the search field. You'll find us. You can join. You can also find us online at Trek.fm and see all of the different shows that we are doing. And if you would like to make sure that all of the content that we're putting out here on Trek FM keeps coming to you, go to Patreon and become a supporter through patreon.com/TrekFM. We've got some wonderful associate producers here specifically on this show. Casey Pettitt is one, as well as Greg Rozier. And we do appreciate their support because we can't do this alone. It's a big network. We're trying to do a lot of stuff for you, and it costs a lot to put all this together. And so we would appreciate your support over at patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, Casey, as we're recording this, today is the release date for John Jackson Miller's The High Country, which is our first Star Trek Strange New Worlds book.
I can't tell you how stoked I am for this. I have already dove in. I've leapt right into this book, and it's, people overuse the phrase, I can't put it down. And while I have put it down, I have it so close to me that I can pick it up at any moment. I am enthralled by it. It is, it's a nice, quick, easy read, and I am just loving the story so far.
That's awesome. I am actually in the middle of reading the first Harry Potter book again, nice. And then my very next book is John Jackson Miller's The High Country. He's going to be on with us next week on Literary Treks, so you're going to be getting some bonus Literary Treks there. We're super excited about that, and I cannot wait to dive in because I've legitimately heard nothing but good things from people, and I love his books. He did Rogue Elements about Rios, which I thought was fantastic. I really loved what he did in that book, so I just can't wait to dive into this. Casey, we also got a new comic announcement, which this is going to be taking place right after the motion picture. So we've got the wonderful pajamas back when the crew of the Enterprise is facing some very familiar foes in a comic series called Echoes.
Yeah, I had totally forgotten this one after they announced it. And, IDW has been putting out a lot of comics, almost to the extent that Pocketbooks used to put out books. So we're in kind of this like prime comic book era of Star Trek. And, I have nothing but positive thoughts about this. Like they've been putting out some really good stuff lately. And, we haven't judged a book by its cover in a long time, but I mean, what do you think of the cover of this comic? Well,
one of the things that I love about it is the way that it kind of echoes the poster, of course. And at the same time, the art looks great. Every single character there looks like their character from this time period. So to me, that's very exciting. Of course, we've got the refit Enterprise on there, which be still my beating heart. I love the refit Enterprise. And the idea of this comic has me kind of jazzed in the sense that they're trying to stop a war starting with the Romulans. And it turns out that they're dealing with their doppelgangers, which... okay, so that's interesting, and it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a mirror universe type thing, so I'm just left wondering what the heck is going on, and who are these echoes, and, maybe how do we stop them from echoing? But I am excited about it, and so for you, I take it the art just tickled your fancy as well?
It did. It tickled it good, and it's nice to see these characters in this era. Like you said, they just look good, and that refit Enterprise coming straight out of the front of that comic, it just looks good. So, they always do variant covers, so the artwork inside could be different, can be hit or miss sometimes, but this cover,
it's true.
It should have some nostalgia for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it absolutely will. This is definitely a cover that is going to grab people, and so I'm looking forward to this comic, and I can't wait for it to get released. On this episode here, we've got 3 comic reviews for you. The first, we've got dropped Resurgence number 4, and this series has continued, I think, very strong, Casey, and here we are left with the possibility and left on a cliffhanger where the Resolute is breaking apart because they have tested the new warp drive to get away, to escape, and things don't go according to plan.
Yeah, this is just another one that's, I think, doing a good job, doing what it's supposed to, and telling a really good story, and basically pumping up the hype for this game that they're going to be releasing. And I mean, I'm enthralled by this little series that we're getting. I'm not sure, I can't remember how many issues we're getting, but I'm invested in this story, and I want to see what happens. This particular issue, just kind of upped the stakes. We've got this, great cliffhanger, like you said, like we don't know what's going to happen with the ship, and it's just taken our characters to new heights. And the one thing I would say, kind of as a knock against this one, if I was going to pick something, first of all, the artwork is just as good as it's been in the other issues. There was like 3 or 4 2-page spreads of story, and for me, especially looking at that on an iPad, like, I don't think any of them really had any scenes that necessitated spreading it over 2. I mean, there's some really gorgeous, like, exterior shots, kind of sprinkled throughout here, but the use of the 2-page layout, just, it's a little clunky when, reading it electronically like some of us do, but otherwise, I mean, it's just, I think it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the next one and seeing where they go with it.
Yeah, I am right there with you. I absolutely feel like this series has just continued to meet the expectations that it set. You know, I had no expectations coming into this. And so this has, really surprised me. And I think it's continued to be a great series. And so the next comic that we have, Casey, is the Illyrian Enigma Part 2, where, we had left the Enterprise in a very precarious situation that Spock is able to find them a way out of. And then I don't know, should we give away what happens in this comic? Because I feel like we find out some very interesting things about the Illyrians, and then it leaves us on another kind of incredible cliffhanger going into issue 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is just another one. If you're a fan of Strange New Worlds, I think you just got to pick this up. It really does feel like they're going to be leading it right into the first episode of season 2 of Strange New Worlds. So, I mean, there's a lot of mystery in this still. I mean, the Illyrians are a mysterious race to begin with, but we've got this kind of uneasy alliance happening, which may or may not be a ruse. I guess we will see. But yeah, it's, I'm a fan of Strange New Worlds, and I think everybody should be, and pick up this comic and, see where the story takes them.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we mentioned a lot, and every time we've reviewed the Lower Decks comic, is that it feels just like Lower Decks. And I think the thing that this comic has done is capture the Strange New Worlds feel, and done it perfectly. The art is great here to really capture the lightness of the characters, but in an artistic way, which is very important, I think, for a comic. But I'm reading this comic in just the same way that I was with the Lower Decks comics. So I'm thinking to myself, I cannot believe they're allowing this to be a story in the comic, because it's that interesting. Yeah. And it feels that important, which is exactly what you want from tie-in fiction, especially these type of comics where they're bridging the gap. And so I could not be more excited about a comic, except for maybe, the next one we're going to review, which is the Star Trek ongoing series that we've got now. But this Illyrian Enigma is everything that I want from a Strange New Worlds comic. And so I love it. I think Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson are doing a fantastic job with the writing here. They obviously know these characters inside and out. And the story, I would say if you're a Strange New Worlds fan, you're not reading this, you're missing something. Like, who would have thought you would say that about a comic?
Yeah. Especially when our history with some of the lead-ins to some of the series and movies were like Countdown, which were, again, kind of hit or miss, something to tide you over until a show came out or a movie came out. But this one does feel like, I mean, it's the epitome of tie-in. They're really tying it into the story that they're showing on screen and giving us something to kind of wet our whistle while we wait.
Yes, 100% agree. So the last comic that we have is Star Trek number 4, and we've got the Theseus, and they are on the hunt for Takan, which is this god city that they were told about by Q. And this one just has some interesting stuff in it. One, I think, Cisco trying to find a way to connect with Jake again and have a conversation with him. I love the difficulty there. There's a lot of technobabble in here, which is, it's a little bit much. But then the fact that we find out the person who's after trying to kill all the gods was terrifying and fascinating all at the same time.
Yeah, I will, 100% on the technobabble. This actually kind of slowed down the story a little bit, but it's kind of another thing, I guess. It's Star Trek-y, but it's too much for a comic book. But yes, the reveal, and it makes sense I guess, who our ultimate villain is, but at the same time, yeah, it kind of makes you think that they might be able to succeed at killing gods. They've done it before in their history. We even get a little bit of that history lesson here, which we've seen on Star Trek before. I think they've talked about it briefly, but yeah, I mean, I'm really, once again, I'm looking forward to where this series goes. The Q issue, the previous issue was okay. Like, it was kind of a strange one. They kind of had to bring Q in, and they even get name dropped here as well in this issue. You know, just when you're talking about gods in the Star Trek universe. This one I felt like we're kind of back to propelling the story forward and you know, kind of seeing where it goes. And, you know, I mean, kind of all of these issues seem to end on cliffhangers anymore, which is good because we want to keep the story moving and get us interested. And, you know, I'm hooked. And, you know, I'm still wondering, is this going to tie in at all to the Star Trek Defiant comic series that's coming out, I think, in March, because, you know, we got Worf here and he's going to be on another series. Very curious about that myself, but we'll see.
Yeah, it does feel like, and I think that storyline is maybe what they're going to do is, you know, they're going to interplay with one another, is my guess. But yeah, I felt the same way that you did. This one definitely is continuing on the story here. You know, we end up at this, you know, God City planet thing. I mean, and it's all like super esoteric Star Trek-y type stuff, which is enjoyable. You know, it has hints of all the different types of stories where you've kind of visited goddish-like beings. You know, it kind of reminded me of V'ger a little bit, and you know, it just has hallmarks of a lot of things that they've done in Star Trek, but then spinning it off in a new direction. And so, yeah, I mean, this is I am continually invested now in these 3 comics so far, and I think I honestly can't remember a time when every single comic that we were reviewing on you know, an episode was a comic that I was actually excited to be reading, and had been keeping my interest every single issue. So all I can say is, in all honesty, well done to Star Trek Comics. They have picked up their game big time and become something that I'm really excited to be reading. And of course, like you said, they're picking up the slack for the fact that, you know, we're not getting very many books right now. It seems more feasible for them to be doing comics, especially since, you know, comics are much easier to tell Elseworld type stories in, and people get that. Whereas, you know, the books, I think people, even though they've never been canon, you know, tend to think of them more in that framework. And so with everything that they've got going on screen, where they still, you know, we're doing Picard season 3, who knows what's going to happen after that, you know, with Strange New Worlds on the air. There's a lot in flux in that area. And so it's just like, it feels like they're afraid to touch too much unless it's the original series. And so, yeah, comics are picking up the slack, which gotta appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I always could go for another novel like the Illyrian Enigma. I wouldn't mind seeing a novel version of that story, but, you know, I historically haven't read a lot of comics. I've read quite a few of the old Star Trek ones from, you know, back in the day, back in the Marvel and the DC days and the Wildstorm and whatever they were on. But, you know, now that IDW's, they got such a good track record, and there's obviously been some misses in there, but I feel like, yeah, like you said, that they're really on a roll here. I mean, I feel like once they've gotten kind of the mirror universe stuff out of their system, we've really gotten some good ideas and good ways that we're taking all of our characters in a good, especially in the Star Trek ongoing series with Cisco and Worf and Data, like and Tom Paris. I mean, like we've got like a lot of kind of legacy characters that we're able to play with, and so it's really fun to see the ones that we wouldn't normally be seeing, in addition to getting something totally original like Resurgence and then, you know, the Strange New Worlds tie-in. So I'm all on board for Star Trek comics these days. The one we talked about at the top here with the Star Trek Echoes, Star Trek the Motion Picture Echoes, I guess. I'm on board for whatever they're going to bring to us.
I am as well, and so super excited to see what comes next with these comics. But Casey, how about we head over to Emissary Sanctuary?
Take me to church.
Well, we are here at church. Emissary Sanctuary, and this series is, I didn't really know what to expect, because fortunately for me, it's not a series I've read, which I love. And I didn't really read any blurbs or anything like this, so I just came into this completely blind, only seeing the cover. And Casey, I think, to me, the craziest thing, one of the craziest things that happens in this story is the fact that we get Emissary Sanctuary, which is DS9 is being transferred to full Bajoran control, which means there aren't any Starfleet officers left, for 60 days for a test run to see basically how they handle the responsibility on their own. And so, what did you think of that? Because to me, I was like, okay, that's really interesting.
It really is. And I mean, I guess like when I step back and kind of think about it, the Deep Space Nine, formerly Terok Nor, once the Cardassians left, they constantly throughout the series refer to Deep Space Nine as a Bajoran space station, like it's owned by the Bajorans, but run by Starfleet or with the assistance of Starfleet. And so, to some extent, like the Bajorans taking over, now we'll get to Kai Wynn, but like with just the Bajorans in general, taking over the station, even as kind of a dry run, kind of a trial to see if they're ready to do it, kind of makes sense since, back, in the early days of Deep Space Nine, they were working towards Federation membership, but ultimately it was a Bajoran station. And so to see how they do now with no Starfleet aboard would be kind of an interesting thing to see. Emissary Sanctuary is an interesting name. It's not the worst name that they could have called it, but when you send the emissary away to see how you do without him running it, it's not really his sanctuary anymore. So I don't know.
Right. So I think the idea is interesting, and I like the way in which you kind of frame it, which is that, Cisco's whole mission here was to get the Bajorans to a place in which they would be able to join the Federation, which is interesting because then the station would become Starfleet run. I think that if the book had framed this as that this is a way to see where the Bajorans are as a people, and if they're basically in a place to which Federation membership could be a possibility at this point, and therefore that is why we are doing this 60-day test run to get that perspective, I think that would have made a lot more sense than the way it's set up here, which is very strange and really doesn't seem to have a full explanation as to why we're really doing this test in the first place. Because it's not connected to what you were just talking about.
Right.
And to me, that's actually really frustrating about the story, because I'm left with this whole story of Emissary Sanctuary as being like, I don't truly understand why this is a plot point.
Yeah, because, and you got, if you look at the front cover of the book, it's kind of Netflix description, if you will, is with Sisko away, Kai Wynn takes command at Deep Space Nine, which isn't exactly how it goes. It's not, Sisko's away, and so she just comes in and takes command. I mean, ultimately, they even say in the book that Shakar should be the one to take command since he's first minister. He's like the head of government, but we all know Wynn and her lust for power and taking that over. But the fact that that's kind of, I guess, the frame for the story in the book, and it takes up such little real estate within the book. The book is actually about something completely different. This is kind of the B or C plot almost of this book. And that's almost the thing that I have the biggest problem with, because they could have fleshed out this time on Deep Space Nine with Kai Wynn in control, but it just didn't really go anywhere. And I kind of, anytime we came back to it, which wasn't very often, I kept thinking, like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we visiting this? Like, let's get back to the other story. So,
right.
Ultimately, I think it was probably a good idea, but it just, at least in this first book, wasn't executed very well, I don't think. Like, it left me wanting more, and I'm hoping we get more in the other books, but as it stands now, I don't really care, much about it. It's just it was almost like a way to take up some words to get to a full word count for a novel or something.
Right. Well, and what's interesting here, too, is that, Kai Wynn is the one in charge, but it's actually Shakar who's supposed to be the leader on the station. But he doesn't ever show up, which is weird. And I don't even remember them explaining why he hasn't shown up yet.
I think it was because Kai Wynn wanted to show up. Like, I think at the beginning, Kira was just assuming that Shakar was going to show up, and then Wynn took it upon herself, like as if she's got the authority to do that. But yeah, like it didn't. You'd think Shakar would have shown up at some point.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it is, I guess, semi-interesting to have this kind of turn into, the way that Bajorans, at least the way that Kai Wynn runs things specifically, is to turn everything into almost a theocracy. And it's not quite that way, but specifically with Wynn in charge, it definitely feels like that here, which, I think when juxtaposed against, I think the way that like Kira would have things done is that it wouldn't be so theocratic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I kind of just got to a point where I had to just, it is what it is, I guess, with Wynn. And I understand that, what we learned from her in the series was that she wanted power. And I feel like this was just her way of taking some power. And yeah, kind of treating Kira even, she always called her child, but she was the epitome of a religious figure in this book, and so with her being in charge of the station, it just didn't make any sense. And I think it's partly because we haven't gotten really any of her backstory yet. We got some glimpses of it, but just I feel like not enough to really flesh it out in this one.
Yeah, I agree. And then you have these aliens attack, Emissary Sanctuary, that they're from the Gamma Quadrant. We don't really know who they are. Starfleet has locked down the quantum torpedoes because apparently the Bajorans aren't quite ready to use those yet. And yeah, I feel exactly as you did. I kept we didn't come back to this story very often, and then when we did, there felt like there was no movement in the story, so it just became I was just really lost as to why we were there. And then on top of that, we have a strange mission with Sisko and the Defiant, who heads to Federation, the edge of Federation space, which I thought we already were at the edge of Federation space, but apparently the other edge. And This is a group of rogue Cardassians who apparently have been disavowed by Central Command have invaded a star system with the help of the Drekla species and the Tifnaki homeworld, which is maybe the most ludicrous planet I've ever had in Star Trek.
Yeah. I mean, it was like a planet of children, and they just, I mean, their whole lives revolve around tech, but and they're surrounded by tech. Apparently, their ancestors like were warp capable and had all sorts of tech, but then these people can barely tie their own shoes because they don't even know what rope is, or like they don't, like it's just everything is a discovery to them, and you got to kind of wonder, like, how have these people survived this long? And when you put on top of it that we've got our Starfleet crew anyways keeps throwing out the Prime Directive like they need to follow it, yet none of them the whole time is really following the Prime Directive. And I mean, this really is a strange mission, because I mean, I feel like too that I guess the mission itself keeps changing, because they're there to investigate, and then they find out about these Cardassians, or the rogue Cardassians, and kind of that they're there to, take over these people and to take over this world, which is, of course, rich with latinum and dilithium and whatever else you could possibly want in the Star Trek universe.
Technology we've never even heard of.
Exactly. To the point where we're now watching, I don't know, Full Metal Jacket, or I don't know, something where they're like training these people for war who are essentially children. And I don't know, I was a lot more into this story, though, I guess, because we got so much of it. The 75-80% of the book was this story, but it wasn't your typical Deep Space Nine story. It wasn't the typical Deep Space Nine away mission.
I think your thought that it's like this weird, Full Metal Jacket, or just Apocalypse Now. Just the whole thing is so strange, and the idea that there are the Tifnaki, or the Tifnak, or I'm not sure exactly how you would say this race, but that they are so childlike, and that they're addicted to tech that they just find lying around, and then they kind of figure out how to use it, and they're like toddlers with magic wands, and they just kind of worship their technology. And it was the one interesting thing about this was the way in which it subtly reinforced the message that people who are given technology to which they have not earned, it's a bad thing. It was an interesting reinforcement of the idea of the Prime Directive by showing what happens when you give people technology they're not ready for because they didn't earn, which was great. I actually thought, as I was thinking about this race and like how ridiculous they are, this really felt like a TOS episode, because it almost felt like, we're dealing with the Iosians here, and so it felt very similar to things we'd seen in Star Trek, but it was very much reinforcing those very classic Star Trek ideals, which is that, technology is so dangerous to people like this because they haven't done anything to earn it, and therefore they don't understand the power of it, and they don't have any inclination of what it could do, because they haven't been through the hard-earned process of trial and error, and the errors really being the thing that help us learn the most, about what not to do with technology as opposed to what to do with it. And so all of that was very interesting to me. And then you mentioned something too, which is, Sisko kind of finds himself almost in a place where I just rewatched Star Trek Insurrection, where Picard realizes, oh, the Prime Directive doesn't really apply here because somewhere along the way, these people had warp-capable technology, and the technology they have now comes from that type of civilization. It's just that these people, and we don't know how or why, have lost the knowledge of where it came from and how they got it and all those type of things. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, part of this is really good and really interesting, and I guess my question is it just that it's maybe not written very well?
I think that's a valid question because, I mean, I hadn't really kind of, as I was reading it, really put it in that perspective of, that this kind of being a way, or, almost a warning, like this is what could happen if we were to, give technology away to people. These people knew, they were very smart, and we saw that in the book, that when their power went out, they had a moment of freak out, and then they kind of figured out how to continue surviving without their technology. And that was, the weapon the Cardassians were using to shut off their technology, and learning how something works, like this is the perfect place for Miles, because maybe also in addition to teaching them how to survive without their technology, Miles should be showing them how the technology actually works so that they can do things to improve on it, or like you get a shield up so that their technology won't fail, or whatever it is. And yeah, like, it wasn't something that came across very well, even like Sisko's realization, but I do feel like that the writing had a major hand in some of the kind of points that could be lost easily on a reader, understandably so.
Yeah, part of this too, Casey, is interesting because it does lead into a question of perspective that Sisko gets into, and the idea of that, he brings it to this, which was really interesting. The idea of that it was Frederick Douglass, a slave who had escaped slavery, who was able to be that movement's most gifted orator, and juxtaposing that with the same thing in Bajor. It wasn't the Bajorans who were the most directly controlled by the Cardassians, but it was the freedom fighters like Kira or people in Shakar's group who were able to escape the lash that gave them the perspective needed to see what was actually happening and then call it out. And that the Tifnakis or Tifnaks or whatever they're called needed that perspective as well. And Sisko gives that to them by seeing the way in which the Cardassians and the Drekla overtake one of those cities where they turn off the technology, and then the people are helpless. And then it forges in them this realization that something has to change. Like that we're in, it's that moment where you realize you're in danger, and that danger is coming for you, and that if you don't do something about it, then you're kind of screwed, and it lights the fires, and Sisko says this, it awakens the burning fires of justice in them.
Yeah, this was one of the most kind of poignant parts of the book that I feel like was actually done pretty well, between, I guess it wasn't so much a speech by Sisko as kind of just his own thoughts about all of this, and just the this was actually a good way that was kind of tied in, although loosely, to what was actually happening on Emissary's Sanctuary, where you've got, the Bajorans liberated themselves from the Cardassians after the occupation. They didn't, it wasn't like Starfleet swooped in and saved the day. They rose up from that themselves, and that's where Sisko's kind of almost likening it to, Frederick Douglass, who had escaped from slavery and helped others to escape as well. And so, with them, like, they're kind of swooping in with the Tifnakis and training them and everything. But the alternative, though, is that the Tifnakis are either going to be occupied by the Cardassians or just flat out murdered. And so there is kind of that, and like allowing the Tifnakis to see, everything that's kind of going on around them and what it is that they need to learn in order to survive. They eventually pick that up themselves and start kind of figuring out how to rappel down a cliff, for example, like, which they were kind of being all playful about the first time, but when it really came down to it, they were really innovative and figured out ways to solve their own problems. And then you put that, into perspective as well with what was going on in Emissary Sanctuary with Wynn and Kira there by, and again, this wasn't really maybe done very well, but, the fact that since the occupation, they've really been kind of leaning on Starfleet like her crutch, even to the point where Kira is doing everything she can to get the security lockout for the quantum torpedoes turned off so that they can use those. And granted, maybe they need some of those. If they join the Federation, they would, be able to get them some quantum torpedoes. But ultimately, the one, and I hate to agree with Wynn, but it's like they're trying to solve this problem themselves, without calling in Starfleet to come swoop in and save the day and everything, and kind of trying to use what's right in front of them there on the station in order to solve their own problems. And I just thought that whole idea, and kind of, even Sisko's perspective on the Tifnakis and everything that was going on was, I thought, really well fleshed out in the story, and really kind of helped drive forward the Tifnaki story, and made me actually start to kind of care about them a little bit.
I like what you said there, because that point of contention between Wynn and Kira is interesting to me, because what I felt in reading that part of the story and how it was connecting with everything else, especially what we were talking about with perspective, is that Kira, I think, actually is the one who has the right perspective, which is that it is okay to be part of a team like the Federation, where we all lean on one another, because we are in need of each other. We're not just in the galaxy alone, right? And Wynn has that, I think, very proud, what we know her for, streak in her, which is that, she's doing this thing and as a point of pride, and not really for any other point. And I think because there is the need to learn to do things for one's own, but there's also a need to balance that with the fact that we all do need one another, right? And so I think it's that balancing act to which I think Kira has learned to understand because of her time on Deep Space Nine, and Wynn hasn't, obviously. And it's obviously the thing that, right, the Tifnaki people don't have, right? They have no understanding of how to even lean on themselves, because they have no basic understanding of even how the universe itself works. They have no science, they have no education, they have no nothing, right? And so we're getting to this point here where it's like Sisko needs to make them less reliant on things that they don't understand and build from the ground up, places where they can learn to rely on themselves, and then they can learn to rely on others, which the thing here is that what's actually being, I think, done in the book thematically is not a bad thing. I just don't think it's necessarily fleshed out or written very well, which is another really interesting point, because Quark has a point where, he talks about, and they call these people natives because they don't have even a generic a name for themselves, really. They have a village, they have that village, they're all disconnected from one another, and Quark actually brings to light like the idea of, and Odo backs him up, it is merchants with trading routes who converted isolated city-states into great nations because they began to connect with one another. And that commerce is not necessarily a bad thing, because commerce is a way in which people are able to, oh, you have that thing I need, I have this thing you need, we trade with one another, we create this economy where we realize that we are in need of one another and that we have value to one another, and then that value can actually get translated into something less transactional and more relational as we grow. But that all starts with trade. And so I was really interested in this because, and that's something to which, when we're in the 24th century, it's hard for those people to even really see that because we're so far beyond people needing that. And yet, when we're building a society from the ground up, that is really important. And so I just it's almost a repudiation of the idea in Star Trek that you can just have the society where we don't need trade, we don't need commerce, we don't need any of those things, and that's actually not true, because even the Star Trek universe still doesn't deal completely with a society that has no economy whatsoever.
Right. I mean, but just I feel like with Quark, like that's where his mind goes, and it isn't so much knowing Quark, and had Quark been written as he kind of actually was on the show, I don't think that he would have necessarily taken those natives aside to teach them commerce to that end. I think in the book they kind of tried to make it seem like he was kind of almost making it up as he went along. Mm-hmm. But at the same point, this is, I guess, one of the good things about Quark, and really even just the Ferengi in general, is that they're supposed to be kind of a representation of humans and our capitalistic nature, our economics and everything, and being able to kind of, for Sisko to even really kind of give Quark kind of the benefit of the doubt, I guess, with this, one, shows kind of what a good captain Sisko is, that he could have just, Quark didn't even have to come with him in the first place. He seemed at the beginning a little shoehorned into the story, but mm-hmm. if it was all for this kind of lesson and having Quark kind of save the day, it did actually kind of work. Because these, like, we've seen multiple instances now, and especially again with this one with Quark, of they're a very teachable species, a race of people, right. So I think that's something we're seeing a lot throughout this story, and to give them this idea of commerce and trade as a way to connect with the other villages. Like, they don't really talk with the others, on the planet, like, ever. And so, like, for this to be a way to kind of start that communication, I think was a really great way for this this kind of story to continue to unfold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you there. With another part of the story that we end up with is that Dax is transferred back to the Defiant and ends up in command. And when they're attacked, it leads to some of the craziest shenanigans we've seen this side of the Kelvinverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what did you end up thinking about that, Casey? Because we end up under the ocean, and then the possibility of one of the craziest ideas of how to contact Cisco. I don't know. It's
I had the Kelvinverse thought too as soon as I read it. I don't know why people insist on taking spaceships underwater, but it was innovative in ways, I guess, and it was something interesting for Dax to do and for the Defiant to do while everything else is going on, I guess. I feel like there were other ways that they could have. I almost feel like, I guess, that the author maybe wrote himself into a corner with the Defiant, and why not just land it somewhere? I don't know. It was just it was Kelvinverse, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never really bothered the idea of taking a starship underwater. Obviously, there should be no reason why you wouldn't be able to do so. I think that the thing for me became the way in which they've decided that they are going to then try and contact Cisco by taking a shuttlecraft out of the ship, and I think they even said runabout, which would be completely wrong on the Defiant. There's no room for that. And that as it's being crushed, then they would get to a point where then they would be released with their scuba gear, and then they would climb the rest of the way to... And I was just thinking to myself, why can't the Defiant just move itself up a few hundred meters to a point where the shuttlecraft or whatever it is that you're saying you're going to ride in could go out safely? Like this whole thing was legitimately nonsensical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even know what to say. I just it was weird. It seemed unnecessary, and it was just another place that felt like maybe the author trying to fill space to get the word count to get a full novel. There's so many different ways I feel like it could have been handled to where it just would have made more sense. I mean, the fact that even like when Dax was practicing, she had to shut the simulation off because she was too freaked out, which one, I don't think Dax would have been freaked out by.
No.
And two, she's a Starfleet officer, and she basically, I don't remember who it was she was with, but they're basically like, yeah, we've practiced the first half, we'll just wing it the second half. Yeah, that seems like a good thing to do for a life-threatening mission you're about to embark on. Yeah, it was a weird part for sure.
Yeah, none of it made sense at all. So one of the things that I had a quick question about, we have Odo thinks he sees a founder with the Cardassians, and that they may be involved in all of this, which, this takes place, it's supposed to take place within season 4, leading into season 5, I guess, before we have the revelation. And so, do you think that the founders are going to be a part of this more so, or is Odo seeing things?
I'm afraid that we're going to see some founders here. Like, they don't dwell on it too much, but Odo has some thoughts about it, and I don't see him as the kind of guy that's going to let his eyes trick him, especially when he's in the form of a hawk and he's got like hawk-like eyes and everything. Like he knows what he saw, and so I do have a feeling we're going to be there. And I mean, there were other things too that the author brought in that maybe wouldn't get revealed on the show Deep Space Nine until later, like even Bashir's genetic enhancement. There's like a throwaway line somewhere about him having to be careful to or that it was vital that he hide his advanced genetics from his friends, which wasn't ever revealed until like midway or kind of the later half of season 5. So we're really bringing in elements from later. And so for here, I wouldn't be surprised if, a founder has infiltrated this kind of rogue Cardassian group and is going to do whatever kind of shenanigans a founder will do there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it felt a little obvious, and so, yeah. I guess a question that I'm really interested to ask you is just about, we've kind of talked about the writing style and everything, but the tone and the portrayal of the characters here, since this is supposed to be season 4 and most likely late season 4, how did you feel like that was done for this book?
Badly. I just, it was, especially once Worf showed up, I was like, okay, this is definitely after season 4, but the way the characters were written felt like the author had never watched the show before and maybe was just using character profiles from like the series Bible or something like that, because I mean, Dax is a sarcastic person. She's got wit and everything, but in this book, it was just laid on so thick. Some of even just like the words, like he kept calling Odo a shape changer instead of a shape shifter. And they used the word changeling once, but otherwise it was shape changer. We've never heard that term before. And it was, I don't know. I mean, Cisco was, I feel like, pretty close to Cisco, but even like Worf and Odo, Quark, like they all just weren't quite right. And it like I said, it felt like a book that would have come out maybe during the first or second season of Deep Space Nine. And it wasn't working. And there was a couple things that I noticed right at the beginning of the book. I think it might have actually been when Kira was trying to unlock the torpedoes. It might have actually been before that, but she gives her authorization code as Bravo Alpha Bravo Echo. And I didn't think anything of it when I read that. And then she tries using Cisco's authorization code, Hugo Uniform November Kilo, which spells out hunk. And then I went back and looked at hers again, and it spells out babe. And I was just like, okay, they're a little too on the nose with the trying to be funny here in this book. And just like, it was all downhill from there.
Yeah, I think you've said it really well in the sense that it does feel like there's a lot that just doesn't work tone-wise. And it's partly because, and we've said so many times, if you're doing tie-in fiction, one of the most important things is to capture the voice of the characters. And I think most of the characters, if not all the characters, never all sound completely right here. And a lot of times they sound more wrong than right. And maybe they've got a right to be wrong. I don't know. But it's, little Joss Stone for you there, folks. I'm not going to sing it, but it's frustrating because, as we talked about, I think that there are some really interesting thematic elements in this story that I think Deep Space Nine does well, which is kind of turn things on their head, right? And to look at the preconceived notions of the TNG era and challenge them. And so the frustrating part is that the writing doesn't allow the book to live up to its potential in that way. So I guess my biggest question comes down to, Casey, what are you going to rate Rebels: The Conquered?
I gave this one 2 pieces of tech found lying around out of 5. And as I really hate to say it, but it's not even a very strong 2. I mean, it's not bad enough that I wouldn't want to give it a 1-star rating, because there were interesting ideas and themes, and I mean, I'm even curious where they could go with Kai Wynn in charge of Emissary Sanctuary, formerly Deep Space Nine, formerly Terok Nor. It's just that the execution of the story, the tying together of the two storylines, just it took me a while to read this book, and it's like 100 pages on my iPad or something like that. It was very short, and I just had trouble kind of getting into it sometimes. And so I'm really looking forward to where the other two books go, especially now that I kind of have a framework for the writing style and how the characters are. I'm hoping that, as we get into the other books, that I can kind of really get into the stories a little bit more. But, ultimately this one, is the first book of the trilogy. I had to give it 2. How about, where did you, how many pieces of tech are you giving this one?
Yeah, I rated this on Goodreads, and I had given it 2, and then I said it was 2.5 out of 5. But as we talked about this, it is definitely a 2. And I 100% agree with everything that you said. I think you summed it up very well about what the issues are in this book and the frustrations that I have with it as well. It was just unfortunate because, and it's always annoying when you can see potential and then that potential isn't played out well. And so, I think we were able to kind of be very constructive in the criticism as to where we thought, oh man, this has, you could do so much with this. And then, the execution just isn't there. And so, the station formerly known as insert here, it's just not what I'd hoped, but like you said, let's hope that the next 2 books are better.
Well, it's kind of a bummer when we don't have the greatest book in the world to read, but I know that's not going to be the case next week. I know next week is going to be a great book. And, we had some great comics this week too, and we've got some Star Trek Picard that's currently airing as we record this. It's a great time to be a Star Trek fan, and I'm just diving into all of it.
I'm right there with you, Casey. You can't win with everything. And so sometimes you get a clunker, and that's okay. But like you said, there's so much to be excited for with the comics we've got going on. John Jackson Miller coming next week with his new Star Trek Strange New Worlds book. And yes, Star Trek Picard's happening now, which, why isn't it Thursday yet as we're recording this? I don't know. Can we just speed up time or,
And listeners, whatever day you're listening to this, is it Thursday yet? We need new episodes.
Yeah, exactly. Is it Thursday yet? But, Casey, if people want to catch up with you, see what else you've got going on these days, where would they find you?
Probably working, but if I happen to grace my presence or grace social media with my presence, it would be on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, all the places at Knitting Trekkie. And then I also poke around in the Babel Conference on Facebook from time to time. Where can people find you?
You could find me all over the place on social media. Matt Rushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero are the places I'm most active. You can also, of course, find me here on the network in our whole other side of the network that we don't talk about Star Trek, the 602 Club. So if you like fandoms like Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Bond, and all things else that in that area, you'll want to check out the 602 Club. Of course, you can also find me doing The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, Saddle Up about Strange New Worlds, and The Artificial Tango is going strong again as we dive into Star Trek Picard Season 3. I'm so excited, so I hope you'll check that out. But, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.